No? I don't know if I can adjust it. Good afternoon, everyone. That's good. Can you hear me in the back? Thank you for joining us today for creating safe communities through collaboration. I'm April Phillips, SUMA's Northeast Regional Director and Councillor for the City of Melfort. A note before we start today's session. The session is being audio recorded. That means if you want to ask a question, we need you to use a microphone. If you have a question, please raise your hand and our staff will bring a mic over to you. When speaking, please identify yourself and your community. Speak clearly into the mic. Using the mic means that everyone in the room can hear you. As well, it will be on the recording, so it's important. There's also a live question and answer function on the SUMA Convention app. That is available for our education session today. If you want, you can ask a question from your seat. Please find the session in the app, enter your question into the live Q&A section. We will then ask the question on your behalf. This also means the question will also be on the recording. The presentations will be available on SUMA YouTube channel and in the member portal on the SUMA website. And we want those recordings to be a good resource for you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Gina Alexander and Caitlin Putland from the Government of Saskatchewan. Community Safety and Wellbeing Integrated Justice Services. Gina is Executive Director serving both the Ministry of Justice and Attorney General and Corrections, Policing and Public Safety. Her responsibilities cover province-wide programs and initiatives, including victim services, restorative justice programs, interpersonal violence and abuse, hub tables, and Northern Alcohol Strategy. Caitlin is the Community Program Manager. Much of her work involves overseeing programs and initiatives in the dedicated areas of interpersonal violence and abuse, victim services, and community mobilization. For those of you with the SUMA Convention app, you can read more about the presenters on there. When you read those full bios, you can see the work that these folks have put into gaining the knowledge that they are going to share with you today. When we plan events for our members, we try to tailor the topics and the speakers to your needs. Please give our speakers your full attention and be open to how their information can apply to your municipality. Some lessons are going to be easier to implement than others, but everyone in this room can use this valuable information and take it back to your municipalities and your offices. Delegates, please give a warm welcome to our presenters.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, April, for the kind introductions today. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we begin our conversation today, I would just like to start us off in a good way. I want to acknowledge that we are gathering today on Treaty 4 territory in the city currently known as Regina. There are likely others in this room who have traveled from Treaty 2, 5, 6, 8, and 10 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Dene, Nakota, Saulteaux, and Métis people. It is with respect and gratitude to know that we work, live, and gather on their traditional lands. As April mentioned, my name is Caitlin Putland, and Gina and I are from Community Safety and Wellbeing with the Government of Saskatchewan.
Thanks, Caitlin. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you for joining us for this conversation today. My name is Gina. Caitlin and I are employed with the Government of Saskatchewan, and we have the great privilege of serving two ministries, and that means two deputy ministers and two ministers. One of the ministries that we serve is the Ministry of Justice and Attorney General. And many of you will know they are responsible for things like criminal, family, and civil courts. They offer a number of programs, including programming for victims of crime, notary public, and provincial fine collection, just to name a few. The other ministry that we serve is the Ministry of Corrections, Policing, and Public Safety. And I don't think any explanation is needed. It's in their title in terms of what it is that they do. Caitlin and I and the team that we work with fall in between these two really big ministries in a branch called Community Safety and Wellbeing. So not only is our branch called Community Safety and Wellbeing, we're going to be talking to you today about a concept titled Community Safety and Wellbeing. And we want to tell you a bit about the work that we do that complements both the work of the Ministry of Justice and Attorney General and Corrections, Policing, and Public Safety. We are 60 employees who work with about 150 community-based organizations across the province to deliver a number of programs and services in the areas of support for women and children fleeing domestic violence, support for youth who have been in trouble with the law and need to get reconnected with their community for education and employment opportunities, support for victims of crime, including missing persons, and assisting vulnerable victims through the court process. We also support numerous communities who are looking to, one, reduce the impact of substance misuse in their community, and two, improve their community safety and well-being, the topic that we're here together to talk about. We're going to share with you some ideas that we have. We invite you to think about, on your drive home, how these ideas, whether it's this afternoon or in a couple of days, invite you to think about on your drive home after the conference, how these ideas might fit with you and the work that you're doing in each of your communities. We want you to consider this conversation as an introduction to a concept. And as we spend time today together, we believe that no one agency, no one level of government, no one community or individual can ensure that communities are safe. However, we believe that together, all of us can improve on and increase community safety and well-being in Saskatchewan. Now, with that in mind, thanks, Sarah. With that in mind, you've all just finished lunch, and in about 10 minutes, your digestive system is going to be competing with your thinking system. So, if you nod off, we're not going to take it personally, because we know about the strength of the digestive system. But because of that, we're going to put you to work right away. And through the course of this hour that we have together with you, we're going to ask you to reflect and then turn to your neighbor and share some ideas that you've come up with based on some questions that we're going to ask you throughout the hour.
All right, so I want you to imagine that you and your family are moving to a new community. Say you're driving there right now to look at potential new homes. Let's say it's early September. The sun is shining. You can smell harvest in the air as the local farmers are taking their crop off. Let's say you're driving into the community and you can hear the sound of laughter or celebrations as neighbors and families are gathering in backyard barbecues to cheer on the riders at the Labor Day Classic. I want you to think about this question. In your mind's eye, what does a safe and healthy community look like to you? So we're going to ask you to turn to your neighbor and just for a couple of moments, just discuss what it would mean to you to live in a healthy and safe community. All right, I'm going to bring everybody back to the room now. It's nice to hear all of the conversations that are going on, but thank you for coming back. I'm wondering if we can have a couple of people just shout out what they talked about. What does a safe and healthy community look like to you? Shout it out. Thank you.
Children
Excellent.
playing, healthy, clean, dogs, healthy dogs. What else? People out and about, walking safely.
Being able to sleep at night without harassment of ATVs running around.
ATV noise, no ATV noise. Good. Social connection. Yes, and one at the back? Upswing and drug abuse. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Yeah, yes, being able to know that your belongings are safe, right? Thank you for that. One more?
Culture.
What about the culture? So the answer is culture here.
Lots of different cultures. I mean, I want to see not just, diverse culture in the community where you feel welcome and feel invited by any type of culture that you are.
So diverse culture that is welcoming and creates a sense of belonging. Does that capture it? Yes. Okay, good. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. We will come back to this discussion, so hold on to your thoughts if your ideas weren't shouted out already. Gina and I are both proud to be residents of Saskatchewan. We've all witnessed strangers helping others that are stuck on the side of the road, or maybe welcoming a stranger into their home for the night if they're stranded and the roads are too bad to travel. Saskatchewan is the largest exporter of lentils, peas, and canola. And Saskatchewan is the most attractive jurisdiction for mining. Saskatchewan is second among the provinces in employment numbers and housing starts. And Saskatchewan is the first among the provinces in manufacturing sales.
Every day, I am reminded about the abundance, the sense of community, and what it means to be a neighbor in Saskatchewan. When a farmer falls ill during harvest, their neighbors help with getting the crop off. We all know about stories like that. I know you were in your conference this morning. You may not have heard this story on the news. It's on social media if you want to hear some more details. This morning on the news, you would have heard or you will hear about Chad from Saskatchewan, who recently found a lost backpack while on a conference in Vancouver. The backpack was found on a train. Chad called the owner, who was waiting to return to Alberta at the airport, and then Chad proceeded to take 2 train rides to get the lost backpack to his owner before the owner's flight left. Yeah, oh my goodness, right? Yeah, that to me is what represents Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan is the largest potash producer and uranium supplier, and the second largest energy producer. Things for us to be proud of. Saskatchewan has the lowest consumer price index in Canada, and it's also set to lead the nation with 5.6% GDP growth in 2022. There are many aspects of Saskatchewan that we can all be proud of, including our leadership in the agriculture sector, in the technology sector, in our export growth, and in our competitive tax environment.
At the same time, Saskatchewan also has a number of challenging statistics. Saskatchewan has the highest rates of domestic violence in Canada. We have the highest rates of alcohol-related vehicle deaths among the provinces, the highest rates of youth crime, highest rates of suicide among the provinces, and the highest rates of HIV.
In addition, we also struggle with high rates of hepatitis C infections, opioid-related hospital admissions, child protection intakes, and high numbers of children who rely on food banks. We continue to strive for higher graduation rates and lower infant mortality rates.
So we've talked a little bit about the ways that Saskatchewan is thriving. We've also talked about some of the areas that we have challenges. You've also thought about what it means to you to live in a safe and healthy community. So we want you to now bring these 3 ideas together, and first on your own and then again with your neighbor, answer the question, what must occur for Saskatchewan to have safer and healthier communities?
When you're ready, turn to your neighbor and discuss this question. When you're ready. And I'm going to remember to. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. You have lots of ideas about what must occur for Saskatchewan to have safer and healthier communities. By way of nodding, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. How many people said communities might need more money? Just by nodding. Nodding? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, I see you. Did anyone think that you needed more police? A couple of people? Yeah, a couple of people? Who here thought that there wasn't enough programming for vulnerable people? Yes? Yeah, hands up. I see lots of people reacting to that one.
What about the need for more mental health services? Did anybody talk about that? Yeah. Did anybody say we need some more services for addictions? Thank you.
So here's the thing. Often we find ourselves thinking that the reason why the current state of our communities is not quite where we want it to be because we don't have enough of something. In some communities, that may be the case, and I want to honor those communities here in this discussion. We also want to provide you with some information that we found, that found us scratching our heads. I'm going to come down there to join you. Yeah. So this chart is really hard to see. So I'm going to break it down for you, and I'm going to come a little closer so I can see what you're seeing. All right. It's tricky to see, and I'm going to highlight a couple of things for you. So the first thing that I want you to notice, excuse me for the people that I are trying to see around me, is the green line is Saskatchewan, and every other province and territory in Canada is listed there. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to point out to you. I'm going to keep walking so I can get out of these folks' way. In 2020, Stats Canada reported on the number and amount of provincial and territorial and local government expenses by budget area. Okay, across Canada, the budgets that are expended. Provincial, territorial, and local government. Each line is a province or territory. Of course, Saskatchewan is there for ease. Anything that is green or blue is spending on human services, which includes social services, education, justice, and policing. Those are the big ones. Social services, education, justice, and policing. The gray parts are everything else, like roads, like infrastructure, like agriculture, like tourism. So when I explain this chart to you, on your own first, and then with your neighbor, what comes to mind when you see this chart? Remember, this is provincial and municipal government funding. What comes to mind when you see this chart? On your own, and then with your neighbor, we'll give you a couple of minutes. All right, welcome back, folks. Welcome back. Anything surprise you on this chart? Any surprises? What were your surprises? The amount of money that is expended by all provinces and territories, including ours, on assisting people. Now, do we know that there's large amounts of money that need to go to education? Absolutely. And do we know that we need to have funding going to justice and policing and social services and health? Absolutely. So this conversation is about what can we start to think about doing differently so that although large numbers of money need to go to those that kind of work, we can figure out what we might begin to do differently. So there's kind of the theme of our time together. What can we start to do differently? So as you can see by this, there's lots of money in the province and across Canada that is invested in people versus things like roads, infrastructure, agriculture, and tourism. So this is our conundrum. We often think that if we invest more money and more resources into a problem, so put more money into the same thing that we're doing, that it will be solved. That might be true when we think about investing in the upkeep of our homes or even in our own physical health. That might be true. If I stick to my exercise routine and keep investing and buy another treadmill that doesn't have clothes hanging on it, or if you stay on top of routine maintenance in your home, you're very likely to see positive outcomes. But what we want you to do next is to think about an example in your mandate, in your community, where you are a leader in your community, where increasing funding in a particular area did not have the result that you had hoped for. Does something come readily to mind? And if you're comfortable, share that with your neighbor. Where did you invest money in your community, thinking that if we just put more money into it, that's going to solve the problem, and that didn't work? Okay, take a minute on your own. If you're comfortable, share that. All right, I am welcoming you back. I'm going to welcome you back and see if there is anyone who would be willing to share their example. Only if you're comfortable. Anyone willing to share their example where you thought if you just needed to put more resources to it, it would solve the problem and it didn't work? Anyone? Yeah, in the front here. Big, no.
We always spend more money on policing,
Yeah.
but it doesn't seem to change anything.
Okay, so sometimes spending more money on policing may not have the exact result that you had hoped for. And there's one other hand in the back, just behind. Same?
Yeah, we have an enhanced policing contract.
Yeah.
Paid for it, worth $600,000, and it hasn't fixed.
Okay, and then enhanced policing costs, that hasn't changed anything. So what I want to do is take a moment here to honor all of my policing colleagues and honor them by saying this conversation is not about not having police. And we need police officers. And when we've got a suspicious van traveling around our small community that I live in just outside of Regina, and it's gone by the school 4 times, I want a police officer to assist or to be out there. Or if we have a number of unusual break-ins, which we rarely do in my community, but if we do, I want the police to be assisting. And I want the police to be assisting us when we, Caitlin and myself and the rest of our team who's here, are working with agencies who are working with people who are very vulnerable and victims of crime. We need the police here. So this conversation is not about not having police. What it is about is how do we start thinking about things just a little bit differently. I'm just going to take a pause here before I go on and just notice the room is a bit hot. I run cold, and so I'm feeling, it feels a little bit, some people are perfect. You've got your digestive system, a bit of a warm room. I see people fanning each other. If you need to stand up to feel comfortable, please just stand up and go to the side of the room, not in front of your person behind you. Go to the side of the room and shift yourself around just to make yourself more comfortable. All right, so we talked a little bit about will money and more resources actually make a difference on trying to solve the next problem. If you could move it to, perfect. In addition to the question about whether more money is needed to solve a problem, another challenge to address is that it's not always clear who is responsible for what or for whom.
Have you ever been asked for help or asked someone for help and heard, well, that's not my mandate? Well, isn't that your mandate? Well, maybe it's neither of our mandates. It isn't uncommon to look at complex social issues and be unsure whose jurisdiction it falls in. Is there any one organization or agency that's solely responsible for solving complex problems like homelessness? Is it the province and just the province? Is it municipalities? Is it First Nations governments? Is it the federal government? What about reducing crime? Who's responsible for that? What about domestic violence? Who has the sole responsibility for reducing domestic violence? With your neighbor, take a few minutes to discuss who has sole responsibility for increasing graduation rates in Saskatchewan. Couple minutes with your neighbor. You say something?
We're going to welcome you back. We're going to welcome you back. We're just giving you snippets of time to mull over some of these questions that we're asking you. It's the beginning of a conversation. It's also a key element of the purpose and the intent of this conversation today, and that is around communication and collaboration. So, on that note, I'm going to have you hold on to your answers about who's solely responsible for graduation rates and ask you this question. What did you discover in your discussions with your neighbor? Did you agree or did you have differences of opinion? Some of you agreed? Everyone agreed? Everyone's agreeable? Okay, well, not all conversations will be this agreeable, but thank you for that. All right. What if changing what we focus on could chart a path for improved community safety and well-being? Think about that for a few minutes. You have spent lots of time, energy, and resources on trying to figure out how you keep your community, as leaders in your communities, how you improve that community safety and well-being. Think for a minute about how we may start to shift our focus in order to improve community safety and well-being. And while you've got that going around in the back of your head, what I want to do is state the following. There we go. Thanks, Sarah. Will communities continue to need to pay attention and require finances and support to assist individuals, families, and neighbors in crisis? The answer is yes. Will we always need expertise of professionals such as police, child protection workers, emergency medical responders? Absolutely. Will it take time to begin to think of something differently and start to make some shifts? Yes, absolutely. And will shifts in approach require us to communicate and to collaborate in ways we have not thought of doing before? So think about, this is a picture of one of the racers in a relay race. Think about the precision of a relay racer, imagining that you're a relay racer and how you have to be in stride and in time in passing that baton along, and how important that is. If we start to shift our thinking about doing things differently, it's going to take some precision and it's going to take some time for us to communicate. It will take time to make this shift, and meaningful change will require us to look at the root causes of crime and victimization. It will require us to think of ways of increased intervention and increased prevention. Intervention and prevention. Change like this is more akin to a marathon race rather than a sprint. It's going to take some time. And here's one example. There's many examples. Here's one. I just found it recently. I thought I would share it with you. In a news article last month, Massachusetts state officials said that 10 years after passing a human trafficking law, Massachusetts is making progress toward combating the crime that often targets children and young adults. So 10 years they've been working on it. 10 years ago they passed a law, and they're now starting to see a difference. It's going to take some time. Can everyone see that little teddy bear on the floor, on the ground there? Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to point that out. In order for us to think about things differently, we need to focus on some things that are really crummy to talk about. I don't know if people say that word anymore, crummy, but when I was thinking about saying this, I thought this is really crummy to even have to talk about it, never mind the fact that we have these challenges in our society. And it's not just Saskatchewan, it's everywhere. But there's hope, so stick with us. What comes to mind for you when we talk about the root causes of crime and victimization? What comes to mind? One example of a root cause is adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences. And we do a lot of thinking in our branch about adverse childhood experiences. There are 10 identified adverse childhood experiences. I'm going to share 4 with you today. Physical and emotional neglect, parental mental illness, homelessness, and protracted and adversarial parental divorce. Those are just 4 of 10. When children experience these adverse situations, it has a significant impact on that child's trajectory in their life. The greater number of adverse childhood experiences that a child has, the greater their risk for adverse mental and physical outcomes. I see some of you nodding. Some of you know and have heard about this before. So what might we do if we now know about at least the idea of adverse childhood experiences? What might we do as leaders to start to reduce the number of adverse childhood experiences that a child may experience? And when I put it out that way, I bet it feels pretty big to hear that, okay? Pretty big to hear that. And what could I do as one person to make a difference in someone else's life? Just sit with that and acknowledge. I want to acknowledge that if it feels big, it is big. There's also something called adverse community experiences. So adverse childhood experiences, adverse community experiences, or another way of saying it is environments. Examples include communities that live in poverty, communities that experience disruption and discrimination, and communities that may not have economic opportunity. These examples contribute to disconnected and damaged social relations and networks. The opposite of what we heard from a number of you earlier in terms of what does community safety and well-being mean? You said a sense of belonging, a sense of community. So those conditions are opposite to a sense of belonging. And I know, and being proud of being part of Saskatchewan, that we can, and it takes all of us to contribute to that, creating that sense of community and sense of belonging. All right, hang on. There's hope. Caitlin's going to lead us through a discussion about the possibilities of thinking about this in a slightly different way forward.
How many hikers do we have in the room? Anyone enjoy hiking? A few? All right, for those of you that didn't put up your hands, that maybe aren't too keen on the idea of hiking, just imagine that you're linking arms with one of your neighbors in the room that does enjoy hiking. We're gonna go on a little bit of a walk together. If it helps you, feel free to close your eyes. Imagine that you've been hiking for an hour or so through a very dense, very green forest, and you start to hear the sound of rushing water. You continue walking as the sound is getting louder and louder, and you can smell the river now. It smells a lot like wet moss, but the smell is kind of comforting and a little refreshing. You make it to the shore of the river, and you see that this river is fed by a very high waterfall. At the bottom of this waterfall, hundreds of people are working frantically, trying to save those who have fallen into the river and fallen down the waterfall. Many of them are struggling in the water. As rescuers are trying to assist as many as possible, one of them looks up and sees just a never-ending stream of people coming down the waterfall, and they begin to run upstream. One of the other rescuers hollers, "Where are you going? There's so many people down here that need help." That person replies, "I'm going upstream to find out why they're falling in the river in the first place." So you decide to follow that person upstream, up to the top of the waterfall. When you get to the top, you find that there's numerous bridges, all of them crossing the river, and they're all in various stages of repair. Some are strong, some are made of very sturdy components, and others are weak and deteriorated. They have flimsy boards and missing railings. Most of the people that are falling in the river are crossing the poorly made bridges. Those individuals that live near or travel from the strong bridges, they're protected. Gina talked about adverse childhood experiences and adverse community experiences. Thinking about this story in relation to adverse experiences, we know that certain groups of people are more likely to fall in the river than others. They don't fall in because of individual weakness or intrinsic flaws, but rather, we know that some people are privileged to live in communities that have the strong bridges made of high-quality material that protect them from falling in the river in the first place. Improving community safety and well-being together, it's about making sure that there's people at the bottom of the waterfall that are able to help and save those that have fallen in, but it's also about working together to ensure that the bridges across the river are sturdy enough for everybody in the first place.
So that's part of the hope. Here's the other part of the hope. How do we go about changing our focus? We've really been focused on one way of doing things. What if we just shifted the dial just a little bit and started focusing on a couple of more things? One example of upstream thinking is focusing on reading. Grade 3 reading in particular. Who here knows the importance of grade 3 reading levels? Grade 3 reading. Okay, some of you do. Yeah, about a third of the room. For those of you who are thinking, grade 3 reading levels, how can that be important to someone who works for the Ministry of Justice or the Ministry of Corrections and Policing? How can grade 3 reading levels be important to us? Here's the thing, and I learned this from my colleagues at Education when I started doing this work a few years ago. They said to me, and I said to them, grade 3 reading levels, they said to me, Gina, it's really important that children attain grade 3 reading levels at that age in grade 3, about 8 or 9. I said, why? And they said, up to grade 3, children are learning to read. After grade 3, children are reading to learn. Okay, get it? Learning to read, reading to learn. So what are some of the things that you learn about in grade 4? More complicated math, more chapter books, many chapter books, thicker chapter books. Science, start on history. So if you are a child that has not attained that reading level, all the things that you are missing out on. Why is this important? Children achieving grade 3 reading levels at that age have a greater chance of positive mental and physical outcomes in youth and in adulthood. Think about that for a moment. Increased positive mental health and physical outcomes in youth and adulthood, linked to grade 3 reading levels. There's a number of educators in this room, I'm sure, that are saying, Gina, we've been talking about that for years. And now what I'm bringing to this conversation is someone who has primarily a mandate of Ministry of Justice and primarily part of a mandate of Corrections, Policing, and Public Safety, also knows the value of grade 3 reading levels. And we share that idea with everyone that we get a chance to talk about. Because if children and youth can have better positive outcomes, that means they're less likely to be involved in the work that Caitlin and our colleagues are involved in, okay? Yeah. Better grade 3 reading levels lead to better grade 8 completion, lead to better grade 12 completion too. And we know we want a province that has high graduation rates and people moving on to post-secondary work as well, so we can stay as competitive as we talked about earlier. So here's my question. So you're thinking about community safety and well-being, you're reflecting on some of the conversations you've had with your neighbors. What if every person in the province knew about the importance of grade 3 reading level achievement? What could we accomplish together if every single person knew that? Just think about that.
All right. So we now know that root causes have an impact not only on the individual, but also from a community perspective. We also know that no single agency or organization is responsible for one major social problem, nor can any single organization solve it alone. We also know that large-scale social change requires broad coordination across different sectors. Now, how do we take all of this information, connect it, and move forward towards a future state that we all want for our communities? Now, just before we go there, we do want to alert you of a couple of challenges that might happen along the way. For those in the back, this is a news article from Regina from December, and it says, "It's always heartbreaking. Regina police beg public to see dangers of opioids." Remember at the beginning when Gina talked about it taking all levels of government, all communities, all businesses, all agencies, and all individuals to make a difference? This requires all of us to have really tough conversations about what kind of bridges people are crossing and what kind of community or individual experiences people have had. We must also acknowledge that it's not going to be easy and there will be setbacks. This is just one type of a challenge and a setback that a community might encounter. So throughout collaboration and working together to create a safer community, setbacks are going to happen and they should be expected. Some of you have been thinking about community safety and well-being for some time. Others of you are just kind of starting out on the path. A few things to consider. There needs to be a focus on short-term needs, a focus on reducing emergency interventions, and a focus on developing that long-term plan. Just keeping in mind that there will be major and minor challenges and setbacks along the way.
So, where to from here? I want to show you a picture. It's actually the picture on the card that was on everyone's chair. We have a few extra if you want to take some with you. I'm going to show you this framework. It is not our framework. Someone shared it with us, and we're sharing it with you, and we invite you to share it with as many people as possible. We talked about the amount of money that goes into helping people in Saskatchewan and other provinces and territories, and that there's needed emergency response. And we all agreed that that can't go away. That will always be needed. And that's what this red circle represents, is the amount of money that's going into assisting people who are struggling. This framework invites us to think beyond that, to also think about intervening earlier. One example, and this is just one, and you probably have 5 or 6 in your communities that you can talk about. One example of earlier intervention, which is represented by the yellow circle, is the action of the hub tables that are currently in 15 communities across the province. Now, just by show of hands, who here has a hub table in their community? Okay, yeah, about half a dozen of you do. Okay, maybe actually a dozen. I saw more hands come up. So for those of you who don't know what a hub table is, it's a group of human services providers, including police, school, mental health workers, and social services workers who meet weekly to identify individuals and families who are starting to show signs of crisis. These frontline workers connect these clients to services before those clients end up in that red zone. So they get to them earlier, intervene earlier. The framework also invites us to think about prevention, which is the blue circle. An example we talked about, not the only example, but one example, is grade 3 reading levels. And finally, the green circle asks us to think strategically and act strategically to know what to focus on in the short term, medium term, and long term. These discussions include an understanding of a community's assets and gaps, what is working well in that community, and what is not working so well, and what does that community need to focus on. What are they focusing on now, and what might they try to do differently? So two separate questions. Keep in mind, this is not a radical change. From what's already being done, it's just a slight tweaking, a slight shift. There are 3 ingredients to support the implementation of a community safety and well-being framework like this. As you can see, they're the black triangles on the screen or on your paper. Collaboration, information sharing, and measuring success. Those are the 3 key ingredients for success to occur. Of these 3 ingredients, collaboration, information sharing, and measuring success, which do you think is the most challenging? Collaboration. Collaboration. I know. Some of you are saying, what are you saying, Gina? What are you talking about? There's bigger things. Let me tell you, collaboration is the most difficult. All right, and this is what it looks like. Often when we think about collaboration, this is what we picture. Smooth, effortless, everyone in sync with each other. But in reality, collaboration can look more like this. So those of you at the back, if you can't see it, they're going in opposite to each other. And unfortunately, it gets worse. It can look like this. The boat is upturned and people are in the water.
I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about collaboration a little bit more, and I just need you to bear with me because I'm going to compare it to long-term relationships. I do want to preface this conversation by saying, no, this isn't some strange form of couples counseling. And no, your partners didn't call me last week and ask me to make sure I talk about how to communicate better. So just keep that in mind. The most common form of collaboration is with our significant others. Imagine a world where we collaborated with our romantic partners the same way we collaborate across governments and agencies. Be kind of strange, wouldn't it? So think back on a long-term relationship that you've had. Would you ever plan a family vacation without talking to your partner? Or maybe would you make a big investment like buying a house without letting your partner see it first? We communicate and share information in good collaborations. We also understand that it takes effort and it takes dedication. Has anybody ever been doing something around the house only to realize that your partner asked you a question and you didn't hear a word of it? Guilty, yeah. Have you ever said anything that unintentionally hurt your partner? We know that in strong collaborations, we sometimes need to have difficult conversations about the impact we have had on each other. Lastly, there are times where we need to talk about the different perspectives we all have. You might not love romantic comedies, but maybe you watch them to support your partnership. But you might draw the line at watching Dancing with the Stars together. So we've talked about the most difficult element, which is collaboration, and the next most challenging element is measuring success. So when we think about increasing community safety and well-being, how do we know that we're meeting our objectives? How do we measure success? There's 4 key questions that are involved when measuring success. The first one is, what will we measure? How will we measure it? What progress are we making? How does this information help us to make better decisions? Each community will have different answers to these questions based on the needs of the community.
There we go. I'm going to come a little closer to you. I have to tell you a story, and it's a bit of a tricky story to tell. It might be a bit of a tricky story to hear. Before I do that, I want to state that some of what I talk about in this story may be triggering for some people in this room. And if it's too much for you and you choose to leave, we have a couple of staff people at the back who will walk out with you. So just wanted to flag that for folks. I want to tell you the story about Jessica. Jessica is 13. This is a story about collaboration. It doesn't start there. As I tell the story, I want you to keep track of how many people were involved in Jessica's life. Over the past year, the police have responded to several calls to Jessica's home. The first one was when a neighbor called and said, I don't know what's going on there over there, but there's a young person with their legs dangling out of a 4th floor apartment. Could someone come and see what's going on? First police call. And then over the course of that last year, the police were called back to Jessica's home. And they were called back a number of times to what appeared to be escalating issues of conflict and violence in her home where she lived with her mother and her stepfather. Over this past year, leading up to this year, Jessica was a good student until recently. Sometimes before this, she struggled in math, but she loved chemistry and loved biology. This year has been different for her, though. She only attends school about 50% of the time, and when she's at school, she's really tired and sometimes sleeping. Jessica was referred to the school psychologist as a result of this, and the school psychologist saw her for a number of months. Jessica was also referred to a mental health worker for 8 months after being admitted to the emergency room for an overdose. 13 years old, admitted to the emergency room for an overdose. She goes to see a mental health worker. She's engaged with that counselor, showed up for all of her appointments, worked through all of the programming that the counselor put forward to her around responsible alcohol use. Her file was closed, no further action required. If you could pass this one. Jessica has also been detained 3 times for shoplifting by loss prevention officers in 3 different stores in her community over the last 8 months. Jessica's been connected to services over the past year, yet none of these agencies knew each other was working with Jessica. How many people was she involved with? A minimum. 14? Some people say 6, some people say 14. Even if it was 6, that's a lot, right? Even if it was 6, it was a lot. Probably was more. So all these people were involved with Jessica. Every one of these people had a piece of Jessica's puzzle. Because they didn't know that they were involved with Jessica, they weren't talking with each other. And these are professionals, of course, in the community that Jessica lived in. Only the police were aware of the escalating violence. Transport yourself back to your 13-year-old self, just for a minute. Transport yourself back to your 13-year-old self. And imagine that secret about what's happening in your home, carrying it in your belly for all of that time. Imagine carrying that in your belly for all of that time. So what Jessica feared, as you will all have surmised by now, is that if she told anyone about the violence, that someone might take her away from her mom. And that was worse than continuing to live in the circumstances. But we know what happens with children and youth. They act out, right? They act out. It's typically not them, it's often their circumstances. Good news, and it's about collaboration. When these professionals connected with each other, with each one using appropriate information sharing protocols, they had the whole picture, not just pieces of it. They had the whole picture. And they were able to talk about Jessica, figure out what services might be available in Jessica's community, and they were able to reach out to Jessica and her mom and get them both connected to appropriate services. That is an example of collaboration. That is an example of how collaboration by professionals can help someone vulnerable like Jessica. Okay? I'm just going to do a time check because what I'm hoping is happening for you, Paul, I'm just going to do 10 minutes or 5? In total or with the questions? Okay. All right. You're probably thinking about a lot of examples of collaboration in your community. Some of it went really well, thumbs up. Some of it you're still learning, and that's okay. The more we practice collaboration, the better we get at it. So that's great. Is the mic available? Paul, do you have the mic? I'm going to invite the Mayor of Nipawin to talk about an example of collaboration. And Paul, or someone's going to bring you the mic right here, Mayor.
So I'm Rennie Harper. I'm the mayor of the town of Nipawin. I come with a background of lots of mental health and addiction and quality of care and that kind of experience before my stint as mayor. But my example of collaboration sort of stems from the fact that I was at one point, and I've talked to some of you before about the hub, and Gina mentioned the hubs in the province. And when the pandemic started on March the 12th or March the 13th in 2020, it was very evident to me that we needed to gather our organizations in our community together to share information. And despite the fact that I was sort of told maybe I shouldn't be doing this, I called together about 23 people in about 23 various organizations, social services, education, a grocery retailer in my community, a ministerial person, the RCMP, the municipality, and quite a few others, Kids First, Family Resource Center, and there are more. What we very quickly realized was that most of us didn't know what the others were doing, and that there were lots of dollars, but nobody really knew what all the information was. So we started to chat, mostly about pandemic, how we were each going to face this, how were local stores managing, how was masking going, who was going to provide masks, all of those early kinds of things. And not very long later, about a week or so, one of our neighboring First Nations communities was locked down. And suddenly there was this realization that you couldn't bring groceries. They couldn't come for groceries. They couldn't come and get medication. So a pharmacist was in our group. And so we started to talk about, okay, so how can we assist that group, both through getting supplies. And so some of our grocery stores got together and hosted the supplies. They weren't donated, they were hosted. Our town put together some of the equipment that we had. We hauled the groceries out there. Somebody else organized they had a kind of a barricade, and people from Red Earth were there to accept the groceries and take them into their community and those kinds of things. So that was one of the early things. And we met every day by phone on a conference call at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we talked about, so what's going on? Who needs what? Does somebody need our help? And who of us can do this? And so we continued to meet. And it wasn't very long before we became a little bit formal, and we didn't need to meet quite so often, so we met every once a week after that. And then it continued, and we met every 2 weeks, and suddenly we sort of realized how much we needed to hear from each other. And so the meetings were never very long. Half an hour was my target, and I was the lead. I saw that as my role as the municipality to bring the groups together. I had the ability to do that, and I continue to lead this group 2 years later. What's happened is that after we quit talking about the pandemic, we realized that there were lots of other things that we could talk about. And so we added more organizations. We've got about 35. We meet every second Tuesday of the month by phone. Everybody gets the chance to speak, tell your story, tell us what you need, and then we go back and we say, so who can help? We found ways to get identification processes for those people in our community that didn't have the ability to get a photo ID when photo ID was required to get vaccine. We've now stopped calling ourselves the Integrated Pandemic Oversight Committee, and we are going to continue. We've developed our terms of reference, and we are now going to be the Integrated Communication Committee of the Nipawin and Northeast area. So it's possible. It's possible. You just have to keep working on it. And you know what the hardest thing is yeah, you always have to have a leader. Even if the leader doesn't say very much, you have to, nobody really wants to take the bull by the horns. So find yourself a leader. They'll come. Honestly, they'll come. Kids First, Family Resource Center, the Hub. If you haven't got a hub, I'm happy to talk about Hub. And I bet Gina is too.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. My guess is there are 25 examples of collaboration that you can, many of you can proudly stand up and talk about. So you're doing it already. We have a couple of things left that we want to share with you, and then we're going to wrap.
All right, so if this framework and what we talked about today is of interest to you or something that you would like to know more about, our branch can support you to start on the path. We assist in facilitating connections to various resources and branches to support planning, and we also support communities in gathering relevant data in order to inform their strategic planning. Information sharing tends to be a challenge when engaging in collaborative work. Where possible, our office assists communities in developing a process for sharing information, which then allows data to be shared in order to know where to put resources. We also offer various other support, such as analytics and information and tools related to best practices and evidence-based approaches to improving community safety and well-being.
We started this session by asking you to think about what a safe and healthy community might look like to you. We talked about the challenges that we face as a province, and that no one organization or individual or business or level of government will be able to do this on their own. It will take all of us together. I'm not sure, I'm going to check in with Paul if we have a few more minutes for questions, but what I want you to know is that we have a bunch of colleagues here. If you want to just turn around, and they're going to wave to you, our colleagues are going to wave to you. If you have questions after this session, you can talk to anyone who's waving at the back of the room and folks here at the front if you have other questions beyond this afternoon.
There's also, sorry to interrupt, Gina, there's also a box at the back of the room if you want to drop your business cards in there, or if you want to fill out a little form, if you want us to contact you, that's just at the back there.
If you get the PowerPoint presentation, I want to make note of a mistake I made on my telephone number. I didn't do it on purpose. So I just want to let you know, it's 539, not 529, 539-4472, but Caitlin's number is right. So you can call Caitlin and she'll pass you along. All right, Paul, do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we had a couple questions posed through our app, and I'll just make a comment. A couple of the questions that came in relate, I believe, to another area of the ministry. So rest assured, whoever submitted those questions, they will be addressed with the appropriate person within the ministry, but I don't think you'd be in a position to answer it. The second was, would the ministry consider bringing back a version of the fine option program through the Justice Ministry? It was a benefit to nonprofit organizations and low-income earners wanting to pay their debt to society.
So what I can tell you about the Fine Option Program is that we are still thinking about it. We are still working on it. And I believe that there are continue to be opportunities for, I'm not sure exactly what they're referencing, but there continue to be opportunities for not-for-profit agencies to benefit from people who are going through the Fine Options Program. So if that individual wants to get in touch with us a little bit more, please encourage them to do that. Thank you, Paul. Is that the only question? Okay, do we have time for any questions here, or we got a wrap?
The danger with that, we all know what that is. If there's one or two, we could probably answer one or two, but we'd have to be fairly quick.
Okay, all right. You're the boss. You tell me what you want. You tell us what you want to do. One or two questions, if there is.
Girls in the front want to ask a question.
Okay, one question in the front, and if we have time, we'll have one more. I know people are needing to leave to get their next session. Thank you for those of you who have spent some time with us. Really appreciate your engagement and being part of this conversation with us. It's going to go to the front here.
Hi. We talk about children. We talk about help and stuff. And Jessica, we heard the story. Sorry. I've been involved with trying to help kids for many years. And I keep saying this, and Paul Merriman and I had it when he was the Minister of Social Services. You keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. That's insanity. You talk about the children and the help that's for the children, and poor Jessica. The parents are the ones, and I always state this, and this is what makes me so angry with politicians. It's 4 years and you're not to see a result. You're not going to see a result in 4 years. So when you try to implement something and you don't see a change in those 4 years, you get elected out, and that's the problem. And where is the help for the parents? Because the parents are what's causing Jessica to be the way that she is. Why is the focus not on the parents and it's on the children?
So thank you. Nice question. For those of you who may not have heard that, where is the help for the parents who are supporting kids like Jessica? I need to admit I don't have a great answer for that, and it's something that we will be challenged with. What I can say to you is that the communities who have started to embark on a community safety and well-being plan that's predicated on this framework have started to talk about that and start to address that and figure out what services are available to support parents and what services are available to support parents in a way that invites them to participate, as opposed to feels like, you know, they're being mandated to do something. So not a great answer, but we're with you in terms of knowing it's a problem. Yeah, thank you. Is there one other question? I think we have time for one other question. No other questions? Okay, thanks again. Thanks for being here with us.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Gina and Caitlin, for your presentation. We appreciate you taking the time to be here today, and it was a very, very good presentation, something we can all take with us. Thank you all for joining us. I see everyone's on their way. We'll have a short break sponsored by MPE. And during the break, I encourage you to connect with vendors at the trade show and then head to the grand ballroom for the resolutions. I won't keep you. Thank you very much.